Well, certainly a lot for Congress to decide on in the coming months. Morgan Muchnick, founder of the M2 Group, is here in the studio to chat more about the possible outcomes of these congressional goals. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Pleasure.
So, with tax reform essentially done, what is Wall Street looking for now?
Wall Street? Wall Street is, I think, on a bit of a high right now. I think everyone is sitting back and thinking, wow, this actually happened. I think until it happened, there were a lot of people, including Republicans like myself, that was afraid that the Republicans would find a way to, what's the expression they say, snatch victory out of the jaws, snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory, like they sort of did in the healthcare stuff. So they passed that, and that was a huge win. And I think now they're not ready for their next fight. That's why most people believe that the next big agenda issue is going to be infrastructure, because that's the most natural area in which the Dems and Republicans can work together. Welfare reform, like you mentioned, would be a massive fight, and Republicans don't want to lose after a big win. They want to keep the momentum as long as they can.
And why do you think they won't be ready for a big fight?
Because it's an election year, like you said. And I think that the off-term party in America almost always has a hard time no matter what. The unusual nature of the Trump administration puts that even more in the spotlight. Ironically, President George W. Bush, who is himself very unpopular at times, is the only president in the modern era who actually gained seats on his first midterm election. So it happens, but it's very uncommon. So the Republicans know they're in a difficult situation, and the best way they can at least give themselves a fighting chance is to pull off another win and look to a tremendously successful 2018. Leading up to the elections.
Now, from the economic side, we know that Trump has laid out a number of issues, including his big infrastructure bill that he wants. But how does that line up with what everyday Americans, what's weighing on their minds?
Well, that touches upon actually a much bigger philosophical point, is that this administration, the Trump administration, is not a traditional conservative Republican, meaning that he is not for shrinking the size of the government and not really for lowering spending, in the sense that other Republicans have been in the past, going back to Ronald Reagan and on. So, and I think there's actually a lot of people in America, that even Republicans, who sort of buy into that let's spend money if it'll do good for the American people. And infrastructure certainly would do that. Going back to the Obama years, when Obama talked about the now infamous shovel-ready projects that he talked about, there was a lot of support amongst Republicans for infrastructure spending. But we were frustrated with the fact that most of that was just giveaways to the DNC, to unions and the like. For actual spending on infrastructure that will do the country quite a bit of good, he'll see quite a bit of support, he meaning President Trump, I think, from quite a few people. And if it's done well, that will absolutely have a very positive effect on the average American and people who travel here.
Now, let's also look at something very key, immigration. We saw what's been happening with what's known as DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. But we also know that funding for a border wall is being tied into that, and also then tied to the government shutdown. How much bipartisan support do you think we're going to see on this, given everything that's tied to it now?
Well, remember, President Trump is all about deals, right? So everything has to have a give and a take, this for that, tit for tat. The wall is something that was probably the #1 signature policy he campaigned on. It's really not reasonable for the American people, international audiences, or the Democratic Party to expect him to not want the wall, when was the #1 reason he galvanized support early on. Whether it's good or bad, or whether you like it or dislike it, that's in fact the case. So I don't know why people are feigning sort of shock that he's pushing so hard for the wall now. It's because people always thought Trump wasn't true to his word, that he just would sort of say crazy things and not really follow up on them, but they were just campaigns. But he's actually following through with quite a bit of things, whether it's good or bad, depending on where you sit on the political aisle. But he certainly is. So President Trump
But do you not think people have a right to be concerned if you're tying something like government spending in with what happens to the children of immigrants who came here illegally?
Well, I think people have a right to be concerned over anything they like. America is a wonderfully open country, and we do not regulate what drives someone's emotions and what makes them angry or not angry. From a dispassionate analytical point of view, this is exactly what people do constantly in our American process. And it's frustrating to both parties, because we play this game of brinkmanship where we get close to a tipping point in our budget spending and our spending priorities, and only then do we come to these big decisions. And that's problematic, not just because of the wall or anything else, or immigrant children and the like. It's problematic because it's not good governance. It's not the way you promulgate good public policy. And both parties have done this. I mean, I don't think, if I remember right in Obama years, there wasn't one single budget passed in regular order in 8 years, including 2 years of a Democratic Congress in the House and Senate. So 8 years of Obama, and now we're going to Trump. We're not passing regular budgets. We're playing the silly game of kicking the can down the road for 2 weeks, a month, 3 months.
Right.
Then when we get close, we get some controversial issue and hope one side will give or the other side.
It's certainly something that's become the norm. Unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your insights. Morgan Muchnick there, founder of the M2 Group.